There is a word from the Lord, and I thank Dr. Isaac for reading that wonderful passage in John 5 and those words that Jesus uttered that essentially said, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? And as I stand here, I offer those words to you. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? We go to the doctor, and the first question the doctor asks is not, do you want to be healed, but what's wrong? And it becomes an invitation to complain or to bemoan or to be groan what's going on in your life. And because that's usually the first question that we're asked as a child comes in weeping and teary-eyed, the parent says, baby, what's wrong? As we see one another in passing, and that facial disposition that reveals angst or anxiety, our first question to one another is, what's wrong? We spend so much time focusing on what's wrong, where the real question is, do you want to be healed? In this season that the Lord is declaring for us here at Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary, Hamilton campus, the question is not what's wrong. We know what's wrong. We feel what's wrong. We embody what's wrong. We sense what's wrong. Many of us have wounds and trauma and post-traumatic stress because of what's wrong. But the question is, do you want to be healed? It's a perplexing question that probably only Jesus can model. One who has the power to do exceedingly and abundantly beyond what we could imagine, could even want or to desperately dare ask us, do you want to be healed? And the question I offer to you today is, do you want to be healed? Those of you who've been around for a while, we've gone through some turbulence here at our seminary. We've gone through a spring semester that was extremely challenging. And I know folks don't want to talk about it, but it's my responsibility to talk about it, to talk at it, and to talk us through it. Because the question is, do you want to be healed? By ignoring the challenges, by acting as if they don't exist, by pushing them to the side or sweeping them under the rug, all they do is exacerbate. It's almost like a portion of food that is left unrefrigerated, out of sight. You don't see it, you smell it. And then you ignore it until you can't stand the stench. And then the stench prevents you from going in that room. Look, y'all know how we are. Rather than to figure out what it is and get rid of it, we will do everything to go around it and beyond it until you are forced to deal with it. And when you're forced to deal with it, with that time lapse, what you're dealing with has become so huge rather than what it was when it first occurred. Jesus asked the question, do you want to be healed? And he's asking it to a person who the Bible declares was impotent or an invalid. One who is deemed powerless. One who is deemed unable to take action. One who was at this pool at Bethesda for 38 years, the Bible says. If you imagine this in your theologically sound and biblically correct imagination, somebody dropped the brother off at the pool 38 years ago. Because he said he couldn't move. So he was paralyzed in a state of where he was for 38 years. We don't necessarily know what his diagnosis is. We certainly don't know his prognosis. But there's something going on in his life that deemed him impotent, unable to take action, powerless. For 38 years. For 38 years. The Bible talks about the other folks who are there. Some are blind, some are lame. And those are descriptions. But I would challenge us to think those are not diagnoses. Blindness is not a disease. Blindness is not a disease. Let me work this for a second. We have a tendency to think healing is a correction of something that seems incorrect. Blindness is not necessarily an incorrection. It could be a blessing. For some, a diagnosis of whatever it is, you fill in the blank, is not necessarily the disease. I've known some people who have been diagnosed with stuff that seemed to be terminal, and they have outlived the first, the second, and the third date that they were giving of termination. Some even, going back to the 1980s, were diagnosed with HIV, AIDS, another thing we don't talk about, but are still alive today. The diagnosis is not the disease. It's not what makes one impotent or invalid. The disease is being told that you're something that you're not and believing it. And being held hostage to something that somebody else put on you and you believing it. That's the disease. See, the brother couldn't walk until Jesus told him to pick up his mat and move. And what did he do? He picked up his mat and moved. So his legs worked. He just didn't believe that his legs worked. He had the ability to do what was there, but he lacked the faith. He lacked the trust. He lacked the obedience. Let me do it a different way. Some of us are impotent and invalids, not necessarily because of a diagnosis, but because of the anxiety that we have around our depression. And we do so much to hide our depression that it deems us impotent or invalid. Let me work this a little bit more. Some of us are dealing with self-esteem issues. People have told us that we can't do whatever, and we believe it. Or we measure ourselves against some impossible measurement, and we can't add up to it. And so our self-esteem challenges deem us impotent, powerless. Some of us are dealing with self-image challenges. We just don't look the way we hope that we would look, or we want to look. Some of us are too tall. Some of us are too short. Some of us are too wide. Some of us are not wide enough. I mean, you figure it out. I mean, we have all of these self-diagnoses, but the reality is it's the self-image piece that deems us powerless. Some of us have been challenged by abuses. Some by other folks, some by ourselves. And what we've learned about ourselves in those abuses, we have not liked. And they have challenged us. Some of us have had negative family experiences. And we hear folks talk about how much they love their family and how much their family loves us. And it seems like those of us who have had negative family experience, we don't have a place to fit in. We can't tell our narrative because it doesn't fit. There's no room for that. And so we kind of have these internal challenges. Poverty, loneliness. Some of us are perpetual mourners. It's difficult for us to heal from the loss of a loved one. So we deem ourselves impotent, powerless, unable to move forward. And then you have the other stuff, the narcotics and the addictions, alcohol and sex. But the point that I'm trying to make is not to ask you, what are you wrestling with? But to ask you, do you want to be healed? This is the question. Jesus didn't necessarily ask the gentleman who had been there for 38 years, tell me about your problems, I got all day. Right, sit on my couch, let me hear about it. He asked the operative question, do you want to be healed? And in hearing that question, just as you are perplexed as you look at me trying to figure out where I'm going with this, the question is, do you want to be healed? Do you own the stuff that is holding you hostage from being who God has created you and developed you to be in all of your greatness? Are you holding yourself hostage because of your fears and because of your anxieties? Some of us want to speak out about some of the challenges that are going on around the world, but we don't know if we can. We don't know if we have enough information. We don't know if we'll be ostracized if we speak on the wrong side of the aisle. We don't know if we'll be accused of being more political than we are scriptural. And so we deem ourselves powerless, impotent. Some of us are just afraid of being afraid. I know from having been there. From growing up in the streets of Los Angeles and seeing so many murders that you're almost in fear to go outside because you don't know if you'll be the next one. Because it's not bad people who get killed, it's people who are at the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's a marker that you can't determine. So it's not like being a good person and obeying your parents and doing all the things your parents tell you to do is going to keep you safe. In that reality, it just seems like everybody's getting picked off. And so there is a fear of being afraid. There's a fear and anxiety of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And the only way that you can deal with the fear is by responding to Jesus' question, do you want to be healed? So Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary, as a dean of the chapel, I'm going to answer for all of us. Yes. Yes. We want to be healed. Yes, we want to be healed. Whatever and you fill in the line for yourself, we want to be healed. We desire for God to not only meet us at the intersection of our needs, but to show us that God is able and exceedingly abundantly to do more than we could ever imagine, to show us that God is not the one who's given us a spirit of fear, but of power. Yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes, we want to be healed because it does not do us any good to continue to be broken the way that we are. Yeah, I said it. You got to acknowledge it in order to heal it. You got to say that there's something there so that the there is there, so that we can work on the there. But we have to acknowledge it. So this semester is a season of healing and hope. Because we need to reclaim our aspirations so that we can develop into the best of who we say that God has created us to be. We need to reclaim that vision for what does it mean to know that God is able, that God cares, and that God will meet us. We need to embrace that and let that indwell with us the way that the Holy Spirit is. And if you need a picture in your mind, take the picture of all of us enjoying spending time with one another in worship. Whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday. Preferably we'll get to the place where it's both. But you got to start somewhere. To get to a place where we know that God will not just meet us here, but meet us in the classroom and meet us in the faculty room and meet us all over the campus. But to have that aspiration to know that it is possible. Because when you know it's possible, you're willing to work towards it. And so the answer is yes. The same yes that the brother who had been at that pool for 38 years gave Jesus. It's the same answer that we'll give Jesus as well. Will Jesus do it? Oh, yes, he will. Can Jesus do it? Absolutely, positively, he can. Is Jesus focused on Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary? Oh, Jesus is here in our midst. Is it possible? It is. Is it probable? It is. Will it happen? It will. it will.